Welcome to Only True Stories channel. We hope you'll have fun with us. Enjoy watching. Millionaire kicked his wife and daughter out of the house. Years later, he sees his daughter's speech and is shocked by her words. Freya stood at the grand entrance of Michael's mansion, her heart pounding in her chest. The echo of her husband's words still rang in her ears, cold and final. "I don't owe you anything, leave with those cutting words." Freya had been cast aside her years of loyalty and love. Discarded as easily as an unwanted piece of furniture, she held tightly onto the hand of her daughter Bethany, who was just 10 at the time. The innocence in her wide eyes, a painful reminder of the life they were leaving behind. The mansion's doors closed behind them, shutting out the life they had once known. Michael, a self-made millionaire, had grown cold and distant in the years leading up to this moment. His obsession with wealth and power consumed him, and the family he had once cherished had become a mere inconvenience. Freya had tried to save their marriage, tried to remind him of the simpler days before the money and the influence took over. But Michael's heart had hardened. He had everything: power, money, status, and now he wanted freedom. Freedom from the obligations of family, freedom from a wife who had stood by him through every hardship and triumph. But Freya was not a woman who would be easily broken. The years ahead would be difficult, no doubt, but she had one precious treasure that Michael could never take from her: Bethany. They left the mansion with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a few keepsakes Freya had managed to gather in haste. As they wandered through the streets of the city, the reality of their situation began to settle in. They had no home, no money, and no support. Freya's friends, who once envied her marriage, quickly distanced themselves. She was no longer the wife of the great Michael Simmons. She was just another discarded woman. Life became a series of struggles. Freya took on odd jobs to make ends meet, her pride preventing her from asking for help. She worked tirelessly, often late into the night, while Bethany studied hard, determined to make something of herself. They lived in a cramped, rundown apartment far removed from the luxurious mansion they once called home. But Freya was grateful for the small moments of peace she shared with her daughter. They were a team, a small but mighty duo surviving on love and determination. As Bethany grew, so did her ambition. She was a bright student, excelling in her studies and showing a natural talent for business. Freya watched her daughter with pride, knowing that no matter how hard their journey had been, Bethany was destined for greatness. Then one day, when Bethany was 16, Freya received a letter that would change everything. It was an official-looking envelope, the kind that often brought bad news. But inside was something far more shocking. Her father, who had passed away many years ago, had left her a substantial trust fund, a fortune hidden away in a secret account that Freya had never known about. Her father had been a modest man, a humble businessman who had taught her the value of hard work and integrity. She couldn't believe that he had kept such a secret, but as she read through the details, it became clear that he had set this money aside for her, knowing that one day she might need it. Freya stared at the numbers on the page. Her mind racing. This money was enough to change everything, enough to give Bethany the life she deserved, to provide security, and perhaps even a chance at revenge. But Freya had never been one for revenge. She didn't want to use this money to hurt Michael, though the thought crossed her mind more than once. No, she would use it to rebuild their lives, to create something new, something better. Bethany was excited by the news, but Freya cautioned her daughter. "This money is a gift, but it doesn't change who we are," she said. "We've survived this long without it, and we'll continue to survive with or without money." But Bethany had her own plans. As she grew older, she began to understand the world of business and finance in a way that even Freya couldn't. She knew how to use money, how to invest it, how to turn it into power, and she knew exactly how to use it to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Years passed, and Bethany became a force to be reckoned with. She graduated at the top of her class from a prestigious university, armed with not only a degree in business, but also a fierce determination to succeed. She used the trust fund to launch her own company, a small startup that quickly grew into a thriving enterprise. Freya watched with pride as her daughter built an empire from the ground up. her hard work and intelligence paying off in ways they could never have imagined. But there was always an undercurrent of something else in Bethany, something darker. She had never forgiven Michael for what he had done to them, though she rarely spoke of him. Freya could see the anger festering beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to explode. That moment came when Bethany's company was invited to a prestigious business awards ceremony. It was the kind of event that attracted the elite, the millionaires, the power brokers, the titans of industry, and Michael Simmons, still as powerful and influential as ever, would be there. Bethany didn't tell Freya about the invitation at first. She knew her mother would discourage her from confronting the man who had cast them aside all those years ago. But Bethany had a plan, a carefully crafted strategy that would bring Michael's world crashing down in front of the very people he sought to impress. The night of the event arrived, and Bethany stood in front of the mirror, her reflection staring back at her with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She was no longer the abandoned daughter of a forgotten wife. She was a powerful businesswoman ready to reclaim her place in the world. Freya, sensing that something monumental was about to happen, asked Bethany one last time if she was sure she wanted to go. "Are you ready to face him?" she asked softly. Bethany smiled, a fierce glint in her eyes. "I've been ready for years."
Mom, it's time.
As Bethany arrived at the grand ballroom, the air buzzed with the excitement of the elite. She mingled with other business leaders, her presence commanding respect and admiration. But her mind was on one person, Michael. The time for their long-awaited confrontation was near. Bethany moved gracefully through the ballroom, her presence undeniable. She was no longer the young girl her father had discarded. She was a woman of power, wealth, and influence. Every step she took was filled with purpose. She was about to face the man who had abandoned her and her mother, and she would do so not as a victim, but as an equal. The ballroom was filled with chatter, clicking glasses, and the soft hum of music, but all of it was background noise to Bethany. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for Michael. The anticipation built inside her a mixture of anxiety and resolve. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, yet nothing could prepare her for the real thing. Then she saw him. Michael stood near the stage, surrounded by other wealthy businessmen, laughing and gesturing as though he had no care in the world. He hadn't changed much since the last time she'd seen him. He still had the same sharp suit, the same carefully groomed appearance, the same air of arrogance that had driven her mother away. But there was something different too. Time had softened his features slightly, and for a brief moment, Bethany saw a man who was no longer invincible. Her heart raced as she made her way toward him. Every step brought her closer to the moment she had waited years for. She passed other guests who tried to engage her in conversation. But Bethany's focus was unwavering. Tonight, she wasn't just another guest at a business gala. She was a woman with a mission. As she approached Michael, he turned, his eyes landing on her for a brief second. There was no recognition, just the casual element of a young businesswoman in his midst. But then his gaze lingered, confusion flickering across his face as he looked at her more closely. It took him a moment, but she saw the exact second. When recognition dawned, his smile faltered Bethany. He asked, his voice uncertain, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Hello, Michael." She replied, her voice calm and measured. She deliberately left out the word father, refusing to give him the title he had abandoned so long ago. "It's been a long time." Michael's eyes darted around, searching the crowd for any sign of Freya, but she wasn't there. It was just Bethany, standing before him, poised and confident. The shock of seeing his daughter after so many years was written all over his face, but Bethany remained steady, refusing to let the past overwhelm her. "I didn't expect to see you here," Michael said, recovering quickly. He attempted to sound casual, but the tension in his voice betrayed him. "I imagine you didn't," Bethany said, with a faint smile. "But then again, you probably don't spend much time thinking about the people you leave behind." Her words were pointed and Michael stiffened, but before he could respond, the event organizer's voice boomed across the room, calling everyone's attention to the stage. The time had come for the evening's main event, the presentation of the Businesswoman of the Year award, a prestigious honor that had garnered significant media attention. Michael glanced at Bethany, clearly uncomfortable, but the crowd was already turning its attention to the front. To his surprise, Bethany began walking toward the stage, her stride confident and deliberate. Michael watched in confusion as she made her way to the podium. A murmur rippled through the audience as they realized who she was. Bethany Simmons, the CEO of one of the most successful tech startups in the country. Many had heard of her meteoric rise in the business world, but few knew the personal history that connected her to Michael. As Bethany took the microphone, the room fell silent, cameras flashed, and the attention of the entire event was focused on her. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "Thank you for this incredible honor." Bethany began, her voice steady and clear. "It's a privilege to stand here tonight among so many accomplished people. I've worked hard to build my company, but I didn't do it alone. My mother, Freya, has been my constant support and inspiration. Without her, I wouldn't be standing here today." She paused, letting her words sink in the crowd. Michael shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of where this was headed. "When I was a child," Bethany continued, her voice filled with emotion, "my mother and I were abandoned by someone who should have protected us, cared for us, and loved us instead. We were left with nothing, no home, no money, no future. But what we did have was each other, and that was enough." The audience was rapt, hanging on her every word. Michael's face had turned pale, his confident demeanor replaced by growing anxiety. He had spent years carefully curating his image as a successful businessman and philanthropist, and now it was all on the verge of being shattered. "But life has a way of surprising you," Bethany said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "What that person didn't know was that we had something far more valuable than money, a legacy left by my maternal grandfather. He left us a trust fund hidden away for years, which I used to start my own company." There was a collective gasp from the audience, the revelation sending shockwaves through the room. Michael looked as though he had been struck, his eyes wide with disbelief. "I built my company from the ground up, just like my father once did," Bethany said, her voice growing stronger, but unlike him. "I didn't abandon my family in the process. I've worked hard to prove that you don't need to destroy others to succeed." The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. And now she continued, her eyes locking with Michael's. "I've come full circle because as of tonight, my company has completed the acquisition of Simmons Industries." "That's right. The company that my father built using resources he took from others now belongs to me." The audience erupted in gasps and murmurs, the revelation too shocking to comprehend. Michael's face drained of color, the full impact of her words sinking in. "I didn't need to do this," Bethany said, her voice softening. "I could have let it go, but sometimes fate gives you the chance to right a wrong. And tonight I'm taking back what was stolen from us." Michael stood frozen, unable to move or speak. The man who had once held all the power now stood powerless before the daughter he had discarded. Bethany stepped back from the microphone, her heart pounding in her chest. She had done it. She had reclaimed not just her family's legacy, but her own sense of worth. And in front of the very people who had once admired Michael, she had revealed the truth. The headlines would be brutal and Michael's carefully constructed world would come crashing down. But for Bethany, this wasn't about revenge.
It was about justice.
She had given Michael the one thing he had denied her all those years ago: recognition. As she turned to leave the stage, the applause began. It started slowly, uncertain at first, but soon the entire room was clapping, the sound echoing off the walls. Bethany didn't need their approval, but the applause was a reminder that she had won not just the award, but the battle that had started the day. Her father had walked out on her, and her mother. And as Michael stood in the shadows watching his daughter bask in the applause, he realized that he had lost far more than just a company. He had lost his daughter forever. As Bethany descended from the stage, the weight of the moment fully settled over her. The applause was thunderous, a stark contrast to the deafening silence that seemed to engulf Michael. He stood frozen, his eyes locked on his daughter as if he couldn't comprehend what had just unfolded. The audience had been captivated by the spectacle. Most of them had known Michael Simmons as an untouchable titan of business, a man whose every step was calculated and flawless. But tonight they had seen a different side of him, a man who had not only failed his family, but was now facing the consequences of his decisions in the most public and humiliating way. Imaginable Bethany walked toward the exit of the ballroom, her heart racing, but her step steady. She knew this was not just a victory for herself, but also for her mother, for the years of struggle, pain, and determination that had led them to this moment. She had faced her father, stripped him of his power, and taken back control of her life. But before she could reach the door, she heard a voice behind her.
Bethany.
It was Michael. His voice cracked a mix of desperation and disbelief. She stopped, her hand resting on the door handle. Part of her wanted to keep walking, to leave him there, broken and defeated, but something inside her told her to turn around. So she did. When she faced him, she saw a man who had once been larger than life, reduced to a shadow of his former self. The arrogance, the confidence, it was all gone. In its place was a man who had just lost everything, and for the first time perhaps realized what he had done.
Bethany.
Please wait, he said, taking a step toward her. I didn't know. I never meant for things to be this way. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. You never meant for what exactly? To abandon us, to leave us with nothing, or to live your life as if we never existed. Michael's face twisted in pain, his carefully composed mask cracking. I was wrong, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought that by cutting ties, I could protect myself. Keep control. Thought I was doing the right thing. Bethany's eyes flashed with anger. The right thing? You left us with nothing. My mother worked herself to the bone, just to keep us alive. While you lived in luxury, you never even checked on us. Michael looked down, his hands trembling slightly. I thought you'd be better off without me. I made mistakes, Bethany, but I never imagined you'd rise like this. I'm proud of you.
Proud.
Bethany's voice was sharp. You don't get to be proud of me, not after what you did. The words cut deep, and Michael winced, as if he had been physically struck. The silence between them grew heavy, filled with years of unresolved pain and anger. I've spent so many nights wondering what I would say if I ever saw you again. Bethany said, her voice softer now, though still filled with emotion. But now that I'm standing here, I realize I don't need to say anything more. I've already won. Michael's face paled even further. I know I can't undo the past, but please, Bethany, don't shut me out completely. I want to make things right, can help you, support you. We can rebuild what was lost. Bethany narrowed her eyes. Rebuild? There's nothing to rebuild, Michael. You were never there for me or for Mom. And now you want to sweep in and act like you can fix it with money and power.
Well,
I don't need you, and I never did. Tears welled up in Michael's eyes, the weight of his failures crashing down on him in a way that no financial loss could ever match. He reached out toward her, but she took a step back. You may be the great Michael Simmons, Bethany said, her voice steady and calm, but you're not my father. You forfeited that right the day you walked away. You're just a man who thought money could solve everything. But I've learned that the most valuable things in life aren't bought. They're earned. Michael's outstretched hand slowly fell to his side, his body sagging as though the last of his strength had left him. He had spent years building empires, acquiring wealth, and controlling the narrative of his life. But tonight, he had lost the one thing he couldn't control: his family. I'm sorry, he whispered. Barely audible over the buzz of the crowd around them, Bethany gave him one last look, a mixture of pity and resolve in her eyes. I hope you find peace, Michael, but you won't find it in me. With that, she turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving Michael standing alone, surrounded by people, yet utterly isolated. The once mighty businessman had been reduced to a man who had lost everything that truly mattered. Outside, the cool night air greeted Bethany as she stepped onto the street. She took a deep breath, feeling a sense of closure wash over her. The confrontation had been years in the making, and now that it was done, she felt lighter, as though a burden she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. As she walked toward her car, she thought of her mother. Freya had always been the strong one, the one who taught Bethany to survive to thrive. Despite the odds, Bethany smiled to herself, knowing that Freya would be proud of her knight. She had faced her past, confronted the man who had tried to erase them, and she had emerged victorious, not just in business, but in life. The road ahead was hers to walk free of the shadows of her father's abandonment. As Bethany drove away from the glittering lights of the ballroom, she didn't look back. She had no reason to. Her future was bright, and she was ready to embrace it fully. The next morning, the headlines were plastered with a story of the event.
Daughter
Reclaims fortune from absent father. A legacy restored. The media buzzed with the dramatic twist of Bethany Simmons' rise and Michael's fall, the story of a daughter who had built her own empire only to take down the very man who had forsaken her captivated the public's imagination. But for Bethany, the headlines didn't matter. What mattered was that she had won not just against Michael, but against the version of herself that had once felt abandoned. Unloved and powerless, she had reclaimed her power, her legacy, and most importantly, her sense of self-worth, and no one, especially not Michael Simmons, could ever take that away from her again. My story ends here. If you feel that this story is meaningful and brings useful lessons, please like and subscribe to the channel to support me. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next videos.